inform our members of the audience that coming up next is another interesting topic and a theme around the corner office on green action and collective impact. This is going to be the founders' boardroom. We'll have leaders join in one more time, and we're about to extract some more relevant insights. That's the plan for the evening. So let's look forward to another pertinent discussion coming your way in just a minute. With that, let's go ahead and invite our speakers on stage. First up, as they often say, to get the right answers, you need the right questions. And the only way that is possible is by having a fabulous moderator. We have with us none other than Karan Singh, Chairman, Bain and Company's India offices and Head of APAC, Sustainability and Responsibility Practice, Bain and Company. So let's have you on stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, joining Karan Singh, may I please invite Geetanjali Kirloskar, Chairperson and Managing Director, Kirloskar Systems Limited. May I further please invite Vivek Kumar Devangan, Chairman and Managing Director, REC Limited. Our next speaker, Mohit Bhargava, CEO, NTPC Renewable Energy Limited, NTPC. And we also have with us Nishant Arya, Vice Chairman, JBM Group, and Chairman, Linde, Wiemann, Gmbh. I've also been told that one of our speakers would probably be either joining a little later. All right.
If he comes, he can join us. So thank you very much. We have a 30-minute slot and we have an all-star panel here. So I'll get to it. As Sachin mentioned a few minutes ago, unfortunately we are seeing a deceleration in the decarb journey, and hopefully that's just a temporary situation. The longer-term outlook looks extremely positive. I'm going to focus today's discussion on sustainability and just a subset of SDG. And I'm going to start a little bit by just setting the context of what we are seeing, the situation in India. And the situation is actually a bit of a mixed bag. Even though we have progressed very well, the biggest challenge we're seeing is very low adoption by the SME and the small corporates. This is a huge part of our economy, as we all know. And I think, unfortunately, the journey for decarbonization has not fully gotten started. And as Sachin was mentioning, the biggest challenge or the impediment really is there's an economic cost as opposed to an economic benefit. So we're going to get our panelists to help us think through what can be done for this particular segment. The second corollary actually is for large corporates, there is a very strong pickup when it comes to decarbonization. This is for multiple factors. These could be triggers in certain industries like chemicals or pharma that if they are exporting and they are not ESG compliant, there's a big cost to the business. Or they could be pioneers that we are seeing this pick up. But the biggest challenge when we come to large corporates who have adopted ESG, and they're doing it for economic reasons as well, economic benefits, is the issue not of scope 1, not of scope 2, but of actual scope 3. Scope 3 is the single biggest challenge today, and it is both coming from upstream suppliers and from downstream customers. If you think about it, that's the fragmented base that even the MSMEs are struggling with. So the question I'm going to have Mrs. Kirloskar start, but then Mohit and Nishant, feel free to come in. What does one do to really create the benefit and get adoption in this group?
In the smaller group.
In the smaller group.
Today's green imperative, thank you Karan for starting with me, and thank you for raising this very critical point about small and medium enterprises. So today's green imperative needs nurturing, and to do this, corporate leadership is seminal. But it's very hard and very challenging for the small and medium enterprises, as you just said. And we know that small and medium enterprises contributes 45% to the country's industrial output, with 65-70 million employed in that sector. So in order to meet the SDG goals more aggressively, naturally we would need more traction in that segment. As far as SMEs are concerned, from my personal experience, and we all know, it's quite a challenge for them. It's not easy because they suffer from lack of infrastructure, they won't have sufficient manpower, economics and finances would also be a constraint, environmental constraints would be there. So we can sit here and jargonize as much as we want, but practically speaking, these companies suffer from a lot of internal and external and environmental constraints to even set ESG goals and to even try and move their business model towards integrating ESG goals as an integral part of their business models, as an integral part of their functioning. So I know a lot of young companies, and we are working with them from my company Kirloskar Systems, where the top management, the person at the very top, is highly committed to ESG, and he personally drives that goal within the organization, top to bottom and bottom up. He has to get a buy-in. It has to become a boardroom priority. The same scrutiny and compliance, as you said yesterday, needs to be applied by him to the company itself. Another factor, perhaps large corporates would do well in partnering and supporting companies in their value chain towards meeting ESG goals and setting them. For example, in other words, decarbonizing the value chain by the larger corporates towards their suppliers and vendors. They in turn can do the same with their partners and suppliers, and therefore become enablers to create a larger multiplier effect. That would be one way. I was reading, in fact, about some very large company that has been training, giving decarbonization training to 1,000 companies in its supply chain. And the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer has set that as a goal, as a larger goal in his overall objectives. So that is probably one way that one could look at SMEs revving up and contributing. And that would also meet their Scope 3 objectives of the larger companies, because 70% of the carbon footprint of these businesses would really come from Scope 3, I would imagine. So anything you'd want to add?
I think the partnership is a critical one. I think Mohit and Nishant, just stepping back a little bit, just building on what Mrs. Kirloskar said, what do you believe are the most significant unlocks in this journey? There is policy and regulations, and we focus so much on the supply side, but is there a time for some demand side interventions, huge issues around innovative technology, issues around talent that we heard earlier, issues around funding? What would you say is, if you're just stepping back, are the 2-3 biggest unlocks we need to be focusing on?
So I personally believe that having a clear roadmap of deployment in such cases where you're looking at green technologies or circular economy or even green mobility like electric vehicles, where companies would like to invest, putting them in the priority sector and really seeing that how you could support the technology evolution and the investment roadmap which companies are looking at, and really giving them that kind of imperative focus with which they can clearly demonstrate, because in such sectors technology obsolescence is also a challenge, investments are also required, and the scale is important to be competitive, because competitiveness is the basic threshold to be really going ahead in the market. And things do not really work if they're expensive or cheap, but they work more on the total cost of ownership. And total cost of ownership really redefines this here. And one has to categorically see that how you are not catering to a single market, but you're creating to multiple markets, multiple applications in such cases, and you are becoming an integral part of the global solutioning and the supply chain. And clearly, like what we have seen in the last few years, how multiple companies are today using electric vehicles for meeting their sustainability, ESG and SDG goals. They're using solar energy for really reducing the green and the hydrogen for the gray impact in their whole supply chain and the energy mix which they have. And even the supply chain partners are using such kind of solutions. And categorically, the idea is to see that how sustainability becomes profitable, and that's how sustainability becomes scalable. So eventually we have to see that how are we able to demonstrate and see that countries like India become the sustainability capital of the world. For doing that, we need to have a clear understanding how each and every part of the whole ecosystem, and that's why the ecosystem becomes very important, whether as Geetanjali mentioned about the SMEs, or we look at the larger corporates, or the technology players who would be participating from different countries across the world, coming into the whole ecosystem and really demonstrating this. And that's where I feel that understanding the whole ecosystems becomes relevant, like even when we look at the kind of opportunities we see in the circular economy today. So in the circular economy, starting from the awareness campaigns where people really see that how they are segregating waste, how they are using waste, collection of waste is being done in a proper manner, how biodegradable and non-biodegradable waste is being segregated, then you are using that waste for generating energy, which is green energy. You are also using that for producing different kinds of green CNG or biogas, as people call it, and composting or green fertilizer, organic fertilizer. So it's a zero-sum game at the end of it, and we are able to categorically utilize the waste for generating different sources of revenue, which are useful for different segments, as multiple companies are mandating a certain percentage of their purchase, of their requirements in terms of packaging, or of the products which they consume to be green, whether it's 20, 30, 40%. And that's where the EPR requirements come in for multiple FMCGs and other companies. So I think that is a wholesome solution which one could look at by addressing it through financing, through supply chain, through the ecosystem, through the awareness, and each and every segment of the whole industry can really become a part of it.
Mohit, I think I'll just have you comment on the next question, if you don't mind. Thanks, Nishant. I think there are some sectors that are very substantially impacted in terms of how do they think about opportunities or the issues around green energy transition. And some of the moves some of the players are making in really adopting green energy is extremely significant. One of the best examples, I think, is NTPC, and I'd love to have Mohit talk about this mega transformation that he is overseeing. And just in orders of magnitude, we're talking about 60 gigawatts of green energy, and it's all kinds of green energy, the full portfolio mix. And it's what you just mentioned, Mohit, it's a $50 billion CapEx outlay. So would love to have you explain a little bit more about what NTPC is doing, but more about what are the challenges from a strategic perspective, from a resource allocation perspective, and an operating model perspective as you think about this huge bet by NTPC Green.
Thanks, Karan, and thanks for this question. So it's kind of question where I can actually go on, and probably the balance 19 minutes would not be enough. Yeah. So yes, NTPC, what we're trying to do in terms of energy transition is probably one of the largest exercises any corporate entity is doing. Just for the perspective in terms of numbers, today NTPC is the largest power generating company in the country. We supply almost 25% of the total electricity in the country. Maybe these are being run on NTPC's power. But what we're trying to do is that in the next 8 to 10 years, we want to create a renewables portfolio which is almost as large in size as the fossil fuel portfolio which we have today. This largely aligns with what the government of India has also declared through their NDC targets and the commitments, and what Honorable PM said in Glasgow last year, that we'll be doing almost 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity. So taking that step is important for us, both, as you said, economically. It's important for us in terms of how we approach the entire transition scenario. It's important for us also in terms of how we move on, because we all understand that the requirements of climate change and the requirements to keep the temperatures within 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees, whatever that case may be, is as important and as relevant for us as for anything else. Just one point we need to make here is that when we talk about energy transition and decarbonization, I think the easiest thing to do is look at the power companies. We all tend to look at the power companies because we probably consume the largest amount of fossil as an industry across various sectors. But we also need to understand that we are not the only guys emitting CO2 in the room. The transport sector, for example, the construction sector, for example, steel industry, cement industry, fertilizers, refineries, all of them pollute. We are probably a tad higher. But what we are trying to do today, and this is an opportunity which is available not only to NTPC but to everyone in the room, is actually to decarbonize the entire thing what you do. So this starts with setting up, for example, renewable power projects. So we are going to do 60 gigawatts. And just again, one more number. Out of this, we're actually today working on 20 gigawatts of renewable capacity. That includes solar, wind, storage. And the important thing here is that we're also working on providing round-the-clock power. So this was a discussion we're just having outside the room. What do you do when the sun goes down? So we're just saying, so today, through the use of storage capacity, whatever technology you might use, you can actually provide round-the-clock renewable power. So you can make yourself green at residence level, at company level, at office level, or wherever you're looking at. So this is one way which we can actually convert or transition from using fossil fuel. And mind you, I'm a guy who's actually grown up in a coal industry. So I spent almost 85 to 90% of my working age in an industry which generates power from coal. And from there, we're actually trying to transition. But the larger thing which we are looking at is that once we do renewable energy, we can actually also produce green chemicals. So this could be green hydrogen, this could be green ammonia, this could be green methanol. And these are the building blocks for many industries. So we are looking at the possibility of decarbonizing the entire refinery sector. We are looking at decarbonizing the entire fertilizer sector. We could decarbonize the steel sector. We could decarbonize the mobility sector. We could decarbonize the aviation sector. We could decarbonize the shipping sector. And let's keep in mind that these are all industries which emit huge amount of CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. So on an overall basis, what we can do with renewables today is probably mind-boggling. Of course, this is not the silver bullet or the only thing.
But Mohit, what is your biggest challenge in this transition? What keeps you up at night?
So I think someone asked me this question. Actually, nothing keeps me awake at night. So I generally sleep well. But yes, there are enormous challenges because when we are doing these things, so I could probably list out a whole host, but I must say renewables is a very land-intensive sector. So we require actually large tracts of land. So land is the biggest challenge. Obviously, finance is much larger because when you talk about 60 gigawatts, India is talking about almost 500 gigawatts. So if I am looking at almost $50 billion of capex in the next 8 to 10 years, you can imagine the amount of capital required across India alone. And let's remember, India is not the only country who's looking at decarbonization. Most of the countries across the world are looking at decarbonization through renewables. So the amount of capital requirement and the amount of capital required, whether domestic or international, is humongous. At our level, so land, financial resources. Third biggest challenge, of course, is human resources, the talent. Because this is an industry which is still, we call the sunrise. Of course, that's also doffing a hat to solar. But solar, wind, hybrid, hydrogen, the talent resources, the amount of people required is again huge. And it's very easy to say sometimes when we talk about that we can reskill, it's not that easy. So we need to invest in creating a huge talent pool. And that could be in millions. The jobs could be in millions, but we need to invest in them to provide that kind of resources. So if you look at, so these are three major challenges. And of course, then we get into, there are not enough industrial players who can provide all the resources. For example, if you look at hydrogen, there is not enough electrolyzer capacity in the whole world to meet what we are trying to look at. So these are all challenges which probably storage, for example. There's not enough storage capacity, battery storage capacity being manufactured in the world. So these are all challenges which come along.
No, it's mind-boggling. The one you didn't talk a little bit about was technology. Just maybe a few comments on how do we kind of encourage tech breakthroughs, and where are the areas that you're still betting on, or you're still trying to figure out the right tech solutions? Even RTC is probably will fall in that.
So technology I probably didn't mention because today we are kind of, it's a given for us. So when you talk about technology, so digitalization, ensuring that all your operations run in a mode in which the human intervention or the decision making becomes much lower once we're in the operation mode. So it starts from technology from there, but the technology intervention is also important from another perspective. It's also important that where we are, and I think Nishant touched upon that, the obsolescence in terms of solar, the obsolescence in terms of the battery is much faster. I mean, we all heard of Moore's law when we were young, no?
Yeah.
The rate of change of technology. So that's kind of happening on the solar side, it's kind of happening on the battery side, and the kind of chemistry which is being used. So that's number two. How we increase the efficiency. Just a reference point, today the efficiency of a solar module, the normally used commercial one, I'm not talking about one which has been discovered only yesterday, is about 21, 22%. So people are now actually working to increase that to about 27, 28%. And please remember that this is very high, so let's not start looking at 21 as a very low technology. In solar, 21% is actually a very good technology. From there, people are looking at how to increase it to 27%. When we talk about RTC, for example, you said, so RTC is actually not just technology, it is optimization at the highest level. So we are actually running models to tell us how much solar, how much wind, how much storage, so that we can meet the requirement of power for any industry on 24/7 basis across the entire 24 hours. So that's another evolution of technology. And then of course there are a lot of other things in terms of how we can use monitoring, how we can use it for forecasting and scheduling and all those kind of things. So
Fascinating. Wish you all the best. This is a mega bet. So good luck, Mohit. Nishant, I'm going to come back to you, and then Mrs. Kirloskar, I'm going to come later to you. You talked about two points that I want to pick up on. One, you said the amount of innovation in new business models that are creating new growth opportunities. And then you also talked about what you guys are doing in circularity. In circularity, what we find is we are scratching the surface today. It's mostly focused on waste and recycling. And there is a mindset change we need from current thinking, which is much more linear supply chains, to circular thinking. And there are some great examples globally. We saw some of the data. We are about in single digits when it comes to circularity. And the aspiration has to be to getting to 40s, 50s, 60s. So just if you can comment a little bit about what you're doing and how do we truly create and scale circular solutions, Nishant, that'll be, and then some of the new business models that you're seeing around circularity.
Sure. So I'll try and address it in two different parts here. So first being like we are catering to about 2.5 million households where you see and work with them to enhance the awareness for segregating waste at source in their households, and then collecting that waste and producing different sources of power, energy or gas output, whether it's waste to energy, whether it's compressed biogas or it is composting, and a few other recycled products which are used for different applications. So that really helps them understand that how are they contributing to the larger good, and eventually seeing that how we are not restricting it to recycling only but addressing the problem at source. And clearly that's where we have seen that in certain cases more than parents, children actually have been very upfront, and they have been the change agents in most of the families. And that's been a very heartening experience for us over the last few years. On the other hand, when I see, and as I think Mr. Bhargava also talked about it in terms of RTC, so when we look at the changing technologies, so I really see that technology driving value is a very important perspective. It's not the cheap or expensive technology. And that's where we understand today at multiple forums we hear that when we have electric vehicles, what would happen to the lithium batteries after the first few years. And that's what we have been able to develop now, is that first life is the electric mobility, which is 5 to 7 years or maybe even longer depending on the usage. And the second life is about 10 to 12 years of energy storage. And third life being the power backup as a UPS replacement kind of a solution for different buildings and commercial setups. So 20 years life cycle or more can be clearly addressed. And recycling issues, electronic waste is increasing in India in a very big way as we are adapting to different kind of electronic solutions in our day-to-day lives at personal level or a professional level. So I think that solution is very important. So when we are designing, incubating such kind of technologies for lithium batteries and many other power electronics or semiconductors, having a life cycle management perspective with the product life cycle is very critical, where we see the first life, second life, third life, and then we look at the recycling going after that. And that is where I would bring in a perspective that clearly, like multiple global FMCG companies today look at recycled plastic, and also PET is being recycled in India in some pockets, but I think there's a long way to go. The best is yet to come for us, and clearly that is what I was trying to put across, that how a TCO perspective, total cost of ownership, becomes important. And in multiple cases, there are different technologies which have been very successful. But I think one point I would like to add, a learning which I have had from a country like Israel, which I really admire always, is fail fast, fail cheap, is what at least we adapt and embrace all the time. Because in majority of the countries all over the world, when any such experiments are done, there are a lot of failures which happen, but there are a lot of success stories which come out of it as well. And especially I see in our country and many other countries, in majority of the cases, that people consider that companies and people who have failed in the past are taboos. Whereas 70% of funding happens to people in countries like Israel,
Very
to
true.
people who have failed in the past, because their thirst and hunger for succeeding and knowing what to do and what not to do is way higher. And I think they come up in a very big way. And that's what has transformed, I see, like last 10, 12 years, that country didn't have anything in startups in electric mobility or the green space, because that was not their forte entirely, but it has totally transformed now. It's a different world order altogether. Same thing is something which we could look at doing in India, where multiple startups, corporates, government entities, and consumers could really work in an ecosystem where a lot of good technology can be used in an agile and frugal manner, which can really drive the whole ecosystem, starting from generation to consumption. Whether we look at waste, whether we look at batteries, whether we look at energy, whether we look at any kind of MSMEs or corporates who would be working on such kind of solutions. Because unless and until everyone has the overall perspective, irrespective of what roles they are playing, I think the end goal may not be achieved, because the end state is not understood.
No, it's absolutely ecosystem creation. Very well articulated, Nishant. Mohit, you picked up your comment from you on this, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when we talk about circularity, we are generally quite focused on, treatment of waste and, what to do with waste alone. What we are doing is also, part of what he said, NTPC is also doing. For us, for example, ash is the biggest waste. So we're trying to find ways how we can use ash, and I'm happy to report here that last year we actually were able to utilize 80% of our fly ash generated. And let me tell you, for us, fly ash is almost like in million tons. That's the amount of ash we're generating.
Wow.
But what we're also doing on waste is, and this is one experiment we have done, and this is where innovation comes in. So we found that we could actually convert the municipal solid waste into charcoal. So that's green charcoal, and in fact, early this year we were actually able to set up this technology. We are not the guys, we actually got people who could do it for us. So we have done a project in Varanasi where we are converting 200 tons of municipal solid waste every day into green charcoal. And now this charcoal has a calorific value as good as coal. It is green by any account, and it can be used for anything. If we are firing it on a boilers, you could use it in the tandoors and have green chapatis for all. So that's the one. But one of the larger things we're also doing is how to take care of the emissions. And this is where, because when you talk about GHG emissions, as NTPC, because we burn coal, we're also one of the largest emitters of carbon dioxide. So one of the things we're trying to do, how to convert this. The solution actually, the West is giving is to capture and store the carbon dioxide. In India, we have not been very happy with that solution for one simple reason, because the amount of CO2 you're going to store underground is going to be very dangerous, or could be very dangerous. So we need to find ways to use the carbon dioxide. And one of the pilots we are doing is in our project at Vindhyachal to capture the carbon dioxide, combine it with green hydrogen, and produce green methanol. And for people in the room who know, methanol is a widely used chemical. It has multiple use cases. And India today imports 90% of its methanol. And these could be expanded to produce green ethanol also. So this is another thing. So in our sense, we feel that CO2, so much of it we are emitting, if we are able to capture that and convert it into something usable. So as I said, sustainability can be profitable.
Absolutely. There's a lot of innovation yet to happen, and we need to be thinking of partnerships and ecosystem. The last question is a very important one. I'd love to actually direct this to Mrs. Kirloskar. We've spoken a lot about E, but as always, the S part gets downplayed and gets ignored, or you could call it the silent S. And that is such an important component of the communities, the safety, and thinking about, how, and there's two sets of companies we find. There's a set of companies where, as Nader was saying, it's part of their ethos. If you take a Tata's, about bettering the community is a big part of, what they stand for. But unfortunately, there's the other side where the community improvement and betterment is not that, is not top of the agenda or is not on the CEO agenda. CSR is a massive move forward, but CSR is, there's a significant improvement that is required even in CSR to make it effective. So, Mrs. Kirloskar, what can we do to really take CSR to full potential and to increase the focus on S?
Yes, thank you, Karan. I think the S factor is very, very important to drive ESG and SDG in the larger picture. And perhaps redefine S to provide a better linkage with ESG and SDG would be also required. And greater pressure, greater social pressure, greater awareness would also nudge the individual and the corporates and the businesses to follow policies, processes, and ESG systems that would drive the goals, the sustainability development goals. I always feel that when we talk about the S factor, we lose out on the individual. And I sense today that in corporates, where a lot of our Kirloskar companies are very, very committed to corporate social responsibility and to linking that with the larger ESG goals of our companies across adopting villages near our factories. In fact, we tend to do a lot of work in and around where our factories are located because we tend to move towards the rural sector, which is where we supply a lot of our goods and services. But having said that, I think at an individual level, it's also very, very important to be committed to the CSR, to the society as a whole, and to therefore the goals of the company. Otherwise, I find that the buy-in from the individual is very weak. You're really working towards meeting a compliance. It's not an individual commitment. And society and individuals are going to play a very, very critical role in meeting the larger ESG and the larger SDG goals of any business or any company. Karan, I don't know, but we are talking about this. How much of the world's SDG goals have we met in terms of numbers, the 2030?
I think the data is here.
15%, I would say. And I don't know in India, but I know globally it's about 15%. So that's 2030.
But even in India, I remember the rankings are abysmal. I mean, we are 121 or 122. So your point is right. We've got
unless the individual and the society and the S factor develops a greater consciousness towards driving itself with greater awareness, then that pressure also nudges individuals and businesses in turn to drive policies and systems that meet ESG and therefore SDGs better. So I really think that, at the end of it, I would like to say that unless we are committed to it at an individual level in our daily lives, it would be very hard. I'm wondering when we sit down and when I try and think of what I could do to meet sustainability goals on a daily basis in my day-to-day life, I find that I have very little awareness. So I don't know whether a Sustainability Bharat campaign will help, where in the public domain, there are tips and useful content that's available to us on how do we commit as individuals in our day-to-day life and therefore contribute to the larger S factor of society and therefore meet the SDG goals more rapidly and more aggressively.
Just to add, go ahead. Just to add one point is that I was recently reading a report, so currently about 1.4% of our national GDP is spent on the social impact. And the target which has been laid down by 2030, let's say if we go to $5 trillion or more, the target is 13%, which is $650 billion of investment and money has to be spent over the next few years going towards the social impact. And social impact has multiple aspects to it, whether we look at sustainability, whether we look at the kind of CSR activities or philanthropy or other things which are happening in different cases. But I think the highest contribution there also which they have defined today, which is happening, is on education, health and skill development, which takes about 75 to 80% of it. So I think understanding that any investment or any kind of focus which any corporate, like we as a corporate at JBM Group, we invest a lot on skill development, where 50,000 plus people we've trained at the ground level. I think all corporates and individuals, I think as Mrs. Kirloskar actually mentioned, need to take up this ante upon themselves. What is that they would do and consistently focus on to make things a reality?
It's a mega opportunity. We did a study on this, and Mohit, I'll come to you, give you the last word. It's unfortunately not a CEO topic. It's not a board topic. We are spending in a fragmented manner, and we are not partnering in marshalling the resources. You're right, it is the second largest spend. So even the current spend done much better and much smartly will have a huge impact. So it's a very good point, Nishant. Mohit, I'll give you the last word, and our time, I don't know, Mr. Kirloskar, you want something after that?
I was just wondering whether that could also be not just a boardroom priority or the objective just being, audit and compliance management, whether it could also be integrated into ethos of an organization, which is what we try to do, where there's a buy-in at an individual level. And I think when that happens, your CSR goals get met more aggressively and more meaningfully. So that's the only point I wanted to make.
The most powerful point when we interviewed 30 CEOs was CSR is part of business. It's not a separate topic. And when we talked with Sanjeev Mehta at Unilever, he was giving us the example of what they were doing in Dharavi slums, which is the hygiene program was good business, but also the right thing for the community. So I don't think it has to be separate. So, yeah. Mohit, the last word to you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, first and foremost, I think I totally endorse what Mrs. Kirloskar said and Nishant said in terms of the ethos of an organization flowing from the top to the junior most employee. And of course, just one quick point was that the lifestyle for environment program, which our Prime Minister has said, that actually reflects in terms of how at an individual level each of us can actually make a difference, whether it is in terms of saving energy, leaving the room, switching off the light. It starts from there to, it could be endless. But when we're talking about the corporates, and I also like the point which Nishant made about skilling, because that's another point which we keep discussing as part of just transition. So at NTPC, for example, we've actually helped set up 29 ITIs. We've helped set up 3 engineering colleges and 2 medical colleges. We know we probably cannot train all the guys and give them employment in our industry. Probably we can't. But at least these guys are trained for taking up employment on any scale of any kind across various sectors. So we have to invest not only in terms of money, which we do as a large corporate. We are doing much beyond whatever is the compliance requirement in terms of the financial commitment. But we need to invest in awareness, we need to invest in skilling, we need to ensure that the guys, not only around our power plants, for example, but even beyond, and their extended families get the opportunity to do this thing. Just one last point, I think we missed that earlier. So when we're talking about overall sustainability, so we need to, and probably energy transition, I'm trying to kind of link both of them. So we need not look at only, setting up more and more RE power and, so we need to look at, for example, how can I cut down my emission? How I can cut down my energy consumption. So all these things have to go together.
Reduce the need itself.
I think you had mentioned demand, which is where I just want to touch upon, that we need to ensure that whatever demand we have, whether we can make good with whatever we have today and less than that tomorrow, whether we can move on to energy efficiency as an overall sense in life rather than just cutting down on changing our bulbs to LED bulbs. So these are the points which we can keep on discussing, but we need to implement.
Thanks, Mohit. I think we are way out of time, so just a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much.
And
do we have
applause
time
to our
for questions?
moderator. No, we have to also, big clap to the moderator, to Karan.
Do we have time for questions?
So while we don't have a time, I believe the gentleman has been waiting for a while, so we'll probably take your question, sir, really quick. Over to you.
Regarding the climate change, I would like to tell you that we need 1.7 Earth to live, to survive. It is almost one Earth short. and regarding CSR activities. You know, CSR activities, independent directors are supposed to watch the CSR activities. But as they are paid by the company, they are helpless. So CSR activities are useless.
I don't think we take the same view on the panel, so we'll beg to differ with you on that. So with that, thank you all for joining, and we'll move on to the next part.
Thank you. Thank you very much.